good morning. Welcome to the program. This is Moneyline with me, Nancy Naji. Before we go into the program proper, let's quickly take a break. When we come back, the program continues to stay.
The Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission says upon the completion of the new revenue allocation formula, each tier of government will receive a share in direct proportion to its responsibilities. The chairman, Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, Elias Umbam, said this at a public hearing on the review of the existing revenue allocation formula for the Federal Capital Territory.
The sentity is that every tier of government will have a share directly in line with the responsibility attached to that tier. It is not going to be tumbo. It's going to reflect the more responsibility you have, the more revenue. And the less you have, the less revenue. So it's going to be tied directly on the responsibility of each tier of the government.
The Minister of Federal Capital Territory, Mohammed Bello, revealed that due to low budget allocation, the Federal Capital Territory has continued to witness low-paced development, urging the Commission to increase the revenue allocation.
Either as public servants or either as academicians or as members of the private sector. And the reality is there is so much that needs to be done to be able to really finalize the master plan and the concept. And that cannot be done based on the present system of funding, where Abuja is stocked as a small component of the federal government of Nigeria budget. Abuja should not be looked at as just federal government. It should be looked at as a project for the whole of Nigeria.
In the same vein, the Secretary to the Government of Federation, Boss Mustafa, was represented by the Permanent Secretary, Political and Economic Affairs, Andrew Adejo, explained that until the review of revenue allocation formula is done, there won't be equity among the tiers of government, which will hinder development in the country.
Until such a time that the Constitution is fully reviewed and more responsibilities are taken out of the exclusive legislative list, and those ones that are concurrent are clearly stated as to who handle it, we might not be able to arrive at an equitable, unbiased and sustainable vertical revenue formula agreeable to all.
Emmanuel Howdy reporting for Moneyline with Nancy.
Welcome back. At this point in time, let me launch the session on agriculture that was held at the just concluded African Economic Congress, talking about overcoming hunger in Africa, especially using food technology to overcome hunger in Africa. And we had great panelists that joined the session. Dr. Rislanudin Muhammad, the General Manager, Small and Medium Enterprises at the Bank of Industry here in Nigeria, joined that session. Dr. Debisi Araba, who is a researcher at Imperial College London, also spoke in that session. Isaac Sessi, the Chief Executive Officer and Head of Product Development, Sessi Technologies in Ghana, was in that session. Gbemisola Alonge, who is a Senior Development Analyst at STERS Business, moderated the session at the just concluded African Economic Congress. Take a listen to that topic. We'll be right back.
So the purpose of this session or this panel discussion is to explore different options for food technology in a bid to overcome hunger in Africa. And so it's no news that Africa and Africans suffer severe hunger as a result of different reasons. As a matter of fact, 100 million Africans are currently facing severe, or as the World Health Organization puts it, catastrophic food insecurity. This means that they don't have access to food that's affordable at every point in time. And this is very severe because that's almost 10% of the entire Africa. In some cases as well, there are many parts of Africa suffer food insecurity, maybe not as severe as the 100 million, but significantly high. In Nigeria in particular, food inflation has risen by about 20% alone this year, and that's very severe for many people. So today we're going to be talking about how we can use technology. I mean, we're in 2021, the fourth industrial revolution. So how can we harness technology that we already are so familiar with to improve access to food and to reduce hunger in Africa? So to start this session, I'll go to Dr. Debisi Araba and just ask him about the situation of food insecurity. I mean, we hear every day, people in the Northeast are severely food insecure, 100 million people in Africa don't have access to food. How bad is it really? Can you just give us a picture of how bad it is? And I guess tell us why you think this is the situation across Africa.
Thank you very much, Gbemi, and good morning, everyone. So I think to summarize, the situation is very bad, not just in Nigeria or even across Africa, but around the world. The global pandemic, if anything, accelerated or sharpened our focus on where the deficiencies are in how people access healthy, safe, nutritious food. We've seen images of people either, or empty shelves in supermarkets, or people, governments developing emergency relief programs, not just across Africa, in Asia, North America, Latin America, it's the rest of South America. So it's a global issue, how humankind can produce food in enough quantities to ensure that everyone has, affordable access to something that is healthy and safe. So it's not just about having full stomachs, Benny. The other part of it is nutrition, and the focus over the last decade or two, the global agri-food sector has shifted focus from pure ramping up production to accelerating access to nutrition and health. Or nutrition to improve health, and that's where the rubber hits the road. So in Nigeria, for example, you have your macronutrients with food, carbohydrates, proteins, the basic macronutrients, and then you have your micronutrients like zinc, iron, etc., vitamin A, trace minerals, vitamins, etc. One of the bigger challenges is we don't consume crops; we eat food, and when you think about conversations around agriculture productivity, people still focus and obsess about ramping up crop production. Ultimately, you can ramp up crop production,
can you reduce the volume of your distance?
But the crop production may not necessarily lead to improved access to food. And this is because we have all the technologies in between the production hub of the food system and the consumption hub. So think of a food system as a system, an ecosystem within which we are producing, processing, distributing, retailing, cooking, and consuming food, right? So beginning at the production end, some of you might have heard about, food loss and food waste, and also post-harvest loss. Now, what's happening is in some cases, we don't have either the logistics to move food quickly from the farm once you harvest, from the farm through the retail processes to consumers. So when you lose food on the farm, either through poor harvesting technologies or harvesting. Okay. Bimi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so apologies, listeners, for that interruption. When you have on-farm loss post production, when you're harvesting food, whether you are not using the right equipment or you are not able to move the food quickly enough from the farm to through the retail processes to consumers. So, for example, with cassava has a very short shelf life post harvest, so you need to move it straight into processing or straight to your consumers quickly within hours post harvesting. Now, when you don't do that, you increase how much the percentage of the harvest that gets destroyed, and that is, what we call or we term post harvest loss. Now, when we lose that, depending on the crop or the value chain, we estimate post harvest loss to be somewhere between as low as 20% and sometimes as high as 60% if you have highly perishable crops like vegetables that have very short shelf lives. So if you don't have the technologies that can improve the efficiency of harvesting or preservation post-harvest, so refrigeration, for example, you talk about cold chain. The cold chain is just a way of refrigerating foods that have short shelf lives to reduce or to increase their shelf life, but also reduce the risk of them getting spoiled before they get to consumers. So you need, proper harvesting technologies, you need proper refrigeration technologies, efficient logistics and distribution. I think the biggest challenge that people may not see in the agri-food system is logistics. I know you might have heard people use examples of, if you could get Coca-Cola anywhere in the world, why can't you do X or Y? But the reality is Coca-Cola as a brand or as a company is a highly efficient, vertically integrated logistics company behind the scenes. They just happen to be selling the world's favorite beverage, but behind the scenes, they're probably more efficient than your other courier services, DHL, UPS, etc. Think about also this, one of the world's biggest companies now, Amazon. Amazon sells everything, but in reality, Amazon is a logistics company. If you think about the value proposition, it's not about the products, it's about the architecture behind what they sell. So we need to also deploy that same thinking to the agri-food sector. And I'm excited to see a new generation of technologies coming up. We have startups like Cold Hubs in Nigeria, set up by a dear friend of mine, Nemeka Ikegwonu, who's won awards all over the world and who continues to expand the value proposition of refrigeration as a service. So you don't need to own the equipment. The Cold Hubs business will do that for you, and then all you get is the service. Refrigeration as a service. Innovations working on mechanization, improving the efficiency of farm operations, and of course, we're also looking at innovations around the retail. We also want people to be able to almost near on-demand services. So if you want a daily or weekly supply of whether it's tomatoes, onions, carrots, whatever it is, food or groceries, vegetables, you can get it in a way that smoothens the supply chain. So you're not having this lack of awareness of what's going on in the market. People know, your retailers know what the consumers want, the consumers know what's available, and everyone makes gets fair value. You also want to ensure through the entire agriculture chain that everybody from farmers through retailers, and I purposely include middlemen. I've heard some people say middlemen are bad. Middlemen are not bad. Middlemen optimize processes. They are very necessary for this process. You want farmers or those producing food, whether it's crops, livestock, fisheries, those who are aggregating, those who are processing, those who are retailing, everyone should get fair value, of course, including the consumers. So
Okay.
that's the state of where we are now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arabal. You actually covered a lot of what I plan to dig deeper into. So you have mentioned different aspects of value chain, from production to all the way to retail, and even the quality of food that we're eating. How nutritious is it, and how well does it help us? Just speaking a bit about the people along the value chain, the farmers, the middlemen, the retailers, wholesalers, everyone, including even those who provide inputs for farmers. I'll go to Dr. Mohammed now. What do you think funding, how much of a problem is funding, especially because in Africa, most of the farming and most of the crop production and different aspects of agriculture, whether it's poultry, whether it's processing, are mostly small scale. So what exactly is how big is the funding problem in this situation?
All right, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. It's basically a well-documented situation that we have in Africa, indeed most developing countries. Issues relating to funding for micro and small enterprises, agribusiness, smallholder farming has been a challenge, due in large part to multifarious issues that are endemic in most part of Africa. Um, First, the macro funding has not been as adequate as it's supposed to be. You recall that sometimes I think in 2003, the African Union had what is now called a Maputo Declaration, where um, entire African countries agreed that at least 10% of their annual budgets should be set aside to support smallholder farming, to support agriculture and agribusiness on a general note. That has not been achieved. In fact, some of the 5 countries that have achieved that 10%, if you look at the data, you find out that even before the declaration, they were already well ahead of 10% because if you look at those countries, they are primary agriculture-based countries, very poor, semi-arid countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and so on. So there is that challenge. The general expectation is um, funding businesses, agribusiness, funding smallholder agricultural farming is supposed to be seen as a business. And to that extent, there is expectation that the private sector will take a lead in providing requisite funding. We have not seen that at an elevated level, primarily because of challenges relating to collateral arrangement, issues relating to multiplicity of taxation, which drains the revenue base of the farmers, issues relating to storage facilities. You find in some countries, in some parts of, for example, in northern Nigeria, there are areas that produce a lot of tomato, but Nigeria still import tomato paste. So all these challenges of, lack of integration, backward and forward integration of those small businesses impact and became natural disincentive to private funding, especially deposit money bank. And that is where the development financial institutions, international development agencies do come in. There is also of recent the other sources of funding through the public-private partnership and so on. But to summarize, funding smallholder businesses have been a huge challenge, primarily because of the huge risk involved. And if there is a risk, typically banks will want to hedge against those risks by having a collateral arrangement. And those smallholder farmers do not necessarily have that kind of collateral that will support their businesses to grow and that will incentivize them to produce while ensuring that there is a proper integration in terms of off-takers, aggregators, and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, and thanks for highlighting the issues that have prevented deposit money banks from financing. Usually when we think of funding businesses, we think of banks, we think of already existing traditional financial organizations. But these organizations are currently, like you've mentioned, unable to support businesses where they know that there's high risk. So what they do is they try to ask for collateral just to sort of hedge themselves against those risks. But they're asking for collateral from business owners who can barely survive and can barely afford to provide this collateral. So it's very important, and I thank you for highlighting that. Before we go to Isaac, Ceci, just a few ground rules. If you're not speaking, kindly mute your mic. As much as possible, let's try to prevent any form of interruption. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat box, and then we'll respond to them as much as we can towards the end of the session. Thank you. So to Isaac Jeffrey, thank you for joining us. We have mentioned a few, Dr. Arba had mentioned a few issues that have to do with the agri sector, from crop production all the way down to retail. And I know that your company provides some technological solutions to agri businesses. What issues would you say you noticed that birthed your business, or what led to you creating this technology business?
Thank you very much. For us, just to give you a bit of a background, I started as a research engineer at the Department of Agriculture and Biosystems Engineering in Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And my research usually was around the area of post-harvest losses and simple technologies that could be used to mitigate post-harvest losses. And during my research from 2014 to 2017, one of the value chains we focused mainly on was on the grain value chain. And we realized that even though, especially in Ghana, production kept increasing year after year, we were seeing lots of losses. We were seeing farmers lose a lot of their harvest to post-harvest losses. And many of the causes were just the lack of available tools and services for farmers to preserve preserve their harvest. So take, for instance, a typical farmer harvests his corn. Getting a thresher to thresh is a problem. And so the corn just lies on the field for weeks while they look for a thresher to come and thresh. After successfully threshing, hopefully, there's no way to dry. And so they just spread the corn on the ground, like basically on the bare ground. And then hopefully a truck is passing by and the truck stops and the truck says, okay, I want to buy your corn. So these were like the challenges that we were identified. And in trying to solve that, we realized that there's no single solution or approach that will solve that problem. And so after some research, we came up with like a system of solutions. The question we're trying to answer was that how do we make post-harvest management tools and technologies more accessible to farmers? So first, what we did was we built a low-cost grain moisture meter to help farmers measure the moisture content of their grains before storage, to replace like the rudimentary ways they were trying to measure the moisture content. The next thing we did is we introduced hermetic storage solutions, so that after farmers have tested the moisture content and have confirmed that it was dry enough, they could store securely for up to 2 years. The third thing we tried to do was to create market access by building an online platform that would enable potential buyers to find sellers or farmers who have grains to sell and be able to negotiate good prices on behalf of the buyers. On behalf of the farmers. And so for us, after a lot of research, we came out with a systems approach to try and come up with affordable, accessible solutions that really addressed the key causes of post-harvest losses. Because we realized that production is enough. I mean, production, we complain about low productivity, which is true. But then we realize that if we're to preserve a lot of the waste that was coming, there will be less pressure. There will be less pressure to boost productivity to really high levels. If we can manage what is coming out and prevent them from going bad, the need to really increase productivity very high would be reduced. So for us, we focus on solving post-harvest losses in the grain value chain.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy that you touched on a few aspects of the value chain, from helping farmers measure their moisture content. By measuring your moisture content, you know how long you can store it for, to helping them even store the grain, and then providing an outlet for them to sell their goods at the end of the day, which is very important, especially for farmers. So if you teach them how to store, but you don't give them the market, you're not exactly helping them. So it's just like giving them something that would encourage them to adopt the other technology that you provide. And now we know, now that we know what the issues are, and we know technology is just simply applying science for practical purposes. So applying science in real life. Agric on its own is already scientific. So technology is taking this scientific background, or this scientific thing even further. So I have a question for Dr. Araba. Isaac has already mentioned a bit about the solutions to, reduce the solutions to the issues of post-harvest losses in the grain aspect. One major issue with post-harvest losses in Nigeria that we face is in sectors like tomato or very highly perishable foods. We mention every time that Nigeria produces the second largest producer of tomatoes in Africa, yet the second largest importer of tomato paste as well. So one aspect, one way that we can reduce post-harvest losses is by processing. So what technology can we implement, especially affordable technology that smallholder farmers or small-scale processors can adopt, so that we reduce post-harvest losses, especially for highly perishable goods or food?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gumi. And just as Isaac has shown, it's important to deploy these technologies not just at the scale, but not only sophisticated technologies, but frugal technologies that enable you to achieve the same means. In 2019, I'm a member of the Malabo Montpellier panel, I think, as was mentioned when I was being introduced. And in 2019, we released a report called Bite by Bite, how to expand digitalization in the agri-food sector. And one of the things we focused on was connecting practice to academia/research. In Nigeria, let's speak specifically about Nigeria, and then we can extrapolate across the continent. In Nigeria, as an example, we have the National Center for Agriculture Mechanization, NCAM, in Kwara State. NCAM, one way of doing this is just getting NCAM to design, or getting research fellowships for engineers. We have world-class engineers in Nigeria. The opportunities for practicing may not be varied or diverse, but once they move out of the country, you find them excelling in respected fields. So if we can find opportunities to get these centers that have already been set up to design products and services, test these products and services fit for market, then we even reduce the cost of the acquisition of the technology, right? This isn't something that I don't want to say it's rocket science, because I think agriculture is far more complicated than rocket science. But to acquire technology isn't hard. To build the know-how isn't hard, but we need to do the right things. We need to invest in the research and development systems. We need to ensure that these research and development ecosystems are connected to business. So people like Isaac should really be spending, as he said, I love his transition from the university into practice. We need more Isaacs. We need more people working across the continent, straddling both business and research. And the other side of things is look, in acquiring these technologies, we've seen, using tomato as your very good example. Some of the things need. Another way to look at tomatoes is it's about the variety, right? Different varieties of tomatoes, and when I say variety, I mean a tomato vegetable can have different traits depending on the variety. So some might have a darker color, some might have higher moisture content, some might have a sharper, more intense flavor. We need to ensure we're breeding the right varieties for markets. That's one. Two is also the technology is not just for harvesting but for storage. Lots of people have talked about in the fresh produce sector, fresh produce being highly perishable vegetables, the fresh produce sector, for investing in better storage containers, whether it's plastic containers or more rigid containers that prevent the squashing of or the spoilage of these things during transportation. But more importantly, I think it's the modular technology. So one example that I've seen is an Alvin Blanche, a tomato processing, a modular tomato processing machine developed by Alvin Blanche. And it's something small enough that you can actually move around. And so those are the types of technologies you want to see. Another for the cassava sector that I've seen was developed by DATCO, DADTCO, the Dutch Agriculture Development Technology Company. It's a modular cassava dewatering machine. And so what they do is you can put it on a flatbed truck and drive it out to the farm so that you harvest the cassava roots and then you process. And what it does is it removes, I don't know, maybe it's 40 to 60% of the moisture from that to increase the shelf life. So again, these things aren't far away from us. And possibly maybe Dr. Mohammed will tell us, how do you fund this? When we talk about agriculture being high risk, I think in some aspects of the agri-food sector, yes, the risk is real, but in a lot of aspects, it's perceived. And it's not just agriculture. If you think of macroeconomic fundamentals across the continent, then you realize you can't inject cash into the agriculture sector in isolation, because what will happen is if other sectors are starved of funds, especially affordable financing, then you will find that the funding will make its way into other sectors, right? So we need to figure out in creative ways how we fund the agriculture sector, but more importantly, how we address these macroeconomic fundamentals. We need to increase shared prosperity. And so it's not just about the agriculture sector becoming this oasis of prosperity in a desert of poverty. So we all need to rise. And I think, my gut tells me that's about the only way that we ensure that we fund prosperity across all economic productive sectors of Africa's economies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Araba. You had even already asked my next question. For those that are just joining us, this session is, we're talking about harnessing food technology to overcome hunger in Africa. And Dr. Araba had just explained to us the different technologies. I would call them the low-hanging fruits of technology, really, in improving or reducing post-harvest losses and improving processing in Africa. One of the things that we mentioned is just, having the people who already have a theoretical knowledge sort of transition to the business side. You already know how it works. You know how it works on paper. How then do you implement it in such a way that it's not too far-fetched? You're not bringing high tech or too high tech. You're just bringing something that can easily be implementable by already existing stakeholders in the sector. So Dr. Mohammed, just echoing Dr. Araba's question, how do you think engineers and just young people who, or people, not necessarily even young people, just people who are fresh in the agri sector, people who want to provide this technology in Africa, how do you think they can be funded? Especially because, like Dr. Araba said, sometimes the risk to these businesses is perceived. It's not exactly high risk as we know it. So what options, exist for these businesses or these companies?
Yeah, thank you very much again. I think Dr. Araba said it clearly. Yes, I think the perception about agriculture and agribusiness will have to change across Africa. from being seen as, supporting agriculture as more of a charity, to be seen as more of a business. And the critical sector that is supposed to, spearhead this transformation is the public sector. And in collaboration with the private sector, the support that the public sector gives will incentivize the private sector to get in and invest more massively into the business. Um, and how do they do it? Of course, we cannot deny the fact that there are a lot of risks involved, even though Dr. Araba is saying that it's perceived. It's actually not perceived because there is a risk. Because when you look at in any banking institution, so long as it's private sector business and they want to lend to an individual or an organization, they will look at the risk involved, and they will look at the mitigants to those risks. Part of the risk they will look at is a collateral arrangement. And we all know that it is difficult, if not impossible, for such business in agriculture to grow if we are to become fixated about collateral as a sine qua non to lending. And for that, we must devise a means in which um, we can be able to de-risk lending across that sector in Africa. In addition to changing the mindset of seeing agriculture, agribusiness as kind of a support, but more of a business. Because indeed it is a business. And in your opening remarks, you did mention the fact that the advent of COVID, there is a report from the World Bank which said that almost 250 million Africans were facing hunger as a result of shortage of food and so on. And there is also the story of wastage because of lack of the linkages between the different aggregators, from the farming to the factory that will the processes and so on. All this requires funding, and those funding can come first by providing, like I said, support by the public sector. Then once that support is embedded, it's incentivized, and it becomes consistent, because we have problem of inconsistency in policies across African countries. Once those policies become consistent, then the private sector can be able to plan. In addition to some support by way of grants from IDS, development finance institutions across Africa are supposed to start providing that lead by massive lending to agriculture sector, at especially issues relating to interest rate. The interest rate charged by deposit money banks across Africa is prohibitive, and it is not an incentive. And beyond even agriculture, you can go into any business under such kind of interest rate arrangement. There is a high probability that that business may either fail, or you may barely succeed but end up turning your entire profit to the banks. So the support needs to come from first from the government by way of microeconomic incentive support to the private sector. And then the government also incentivize the private sector to look for funding options, because most of the deposit money banks in Africa rely on savings, and savings and investment are a function of the dynamics of the macroeconomy. If, for example, you did mention the high inflation rate in Nigeria, definitely if inflation is higher than interest rate, then there is no incentive to save. And for that, if there is no saving, there wouldn't be available funds for deposit money banks to lend. And even if they are going to lend, they are going to lend at a very high interest rate. So the macroeconomic situation will have to be conducive, and that is supposed to be led by the government. And side by side with that, the DFIs, the DMBs also should look beyond Africa and look for investment options, monies that can come in, long-term monies that can come in to support business. Monies, not hot money, not money that comes in and they just want to invest in the capital market for a year or two and take away that money. Long-term money, people that want to come and truly invest in Africa. It's a huge economy. It's a huge market. We are over 1 billion people. We are growing, and majority of Africans are young people. So there is an opportunity, and we have to sell ourselves before we can, because the funding is available offshore. But we have to sell ourselves, we have to portray ourselves, we have to also address our internal challenges, especially across the Sahel, in Western Africa. Now there is even a problem now in Ethiopia, issues relating to security. Because without security, there won't be adequate incentive for all those funding options. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I'm glad that you mentioned the need for a stable macroeconomic environment for businesses and for foreign investors to invest in agri-businesses. We've actually seen a couple of investments go to the agri-tech space. Businesses like AgriCorp raising $14.5 million, Real Fruit raising $3 million, and just different processing and different agri-export businesses have proven that indeed investment from abroad can come into the agri sector, especially when you have a business that can thrive. All we need is just the government sort of stabilize the macroeconomy such that more investors can be confident in putting their money into Africa. So I just want to go back to Isaac. You mentioned part of the technology that you deploy to improve the post-harvest sales of farmers. So I just want you to talk a bit about the pre-production aspect, right? So before farmers produce, the kind of seeds that they use, we know that, I mean, because of climate change, there has been a lot of change in like the kind of agriculture is changing beyond what we're used to. So what technology can we sort of deploy pre-planting such that farmers will be able to improve, their productivity, and beyond that, even produce, crops that can last longer, crops that can be stored much better or cheaper, and just things that would sort of help the other aspects of the value chain more beneficial.
All right, thank you. So before then, I want to state that, at least from my experience trying to bring technology into the markets, especially targeted at smallholder farmers, the experience is that, technology is not an end in itself. It's just a means to an end. There is a huge disconnect between the technology and its function and how it works and how it makes a difference, and a feasible business model that can, drive the adoption of that technology. And so, before we went into trying to come up with a system of solutions that address all of the bottlenecks along the post-harvest value chain, one of the way I started, or the way SESI technology started, was we're trying to commercialize the moisture meter that had come out of our research. But one of the things we quickly realized is that, farmers don't care about your technology. They don't care. It's not seed, it's not fertilizer, it's not tangible things that they can see its benefits and its efficacy. And so then if you're thinking about technology, you have to think about it as part of a larger framework of solutions that makes sense to the smallholder farmer, and that you can find a business model, a feasible business model for. Because in the end, like Dr. Mohammed said, it's not charity, right? If you are an innovator and you cannot figure out how to, make money out of your innovation, then, you just fall by the wayside. That's why if you look at all of the agri-tech companies in quotes that are making it, you realize that the tech aspect is they're solving basic problems, right? The solution is not the tech. The tech is just an enabler to help them provide solutions. And so back to your question, in the pre-harvest space, one of the things that we have started doing is working with, we recently started piloting a solution to a soil testing, affordable soil testing solution. Basically, the idea is that we want to help farmers get more insight about what is going on in their soils, so they can make data-driven decisions on like what kind of fertilizer to use, what quantity of fertilizer to use, what kind of crops will grow in the soils that they already have. And the idea is that if we can do this, we can help farmers increase their yield and then reduce the cost of farming. But then what is more important to us is what framework do we use to deliver this solution to farmers? Are farmers going to be willing to pay? What kind of, are we going to sell physical sensors to the farmers, or are we going to provide it as a service? And if we are providing it as a service, who is paying for it? Are we working with the Ministry of Agriculture or the local agriculture office? Are we working with extension service providers who will be providing this as a as part of extension services, or are we like giving this information to farmers as SMS or as like a voice call or what? So beyond the technology itself and how it can help improve farmers' yield and other pre-harvest parameters is the framework within which these innovations are presented, because that is even more important. That is why we have a lot of funding that is going into research, innovations that are coming out, and those innovations are lying on the shelves. Like there's a whole database of innovations that have been developed, funded by the USAID and all of the development agencies that are still lying on the shelves that are like ready to adopt research. And it's just that where people are, it's being looked at the wrong way. It's being looked at just from the innovation side and not also of, okay, how is this going to work in Africa? So I know I'm going on a tangent a bit, but I think that it's important to really state categorically that it's less of the innovation and more of how do we deliver this innovation within the context that makes sense for African farmers and how agriculture is done in Africa. We really have to think about that. Otherwise, we're going to keep talking about the same problems over and over and over again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Isaac. We're almost out of time. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box, and we will respond to them we'll respond to as many as we can. So back to you, Dr. Araba. We've spoken a bit about the production aspect, spoken also about storage, spoken about processing. One major issue with insecurity, food insecurity in Africa, especially in war-torn zones in Africa, is access. So one thing is the people there are unable to afford food because they've been displaced from their homes and they've just, things have just changed for them. They're unable to even make money to exchange for this food. Another thing is the people who are providing this food, the people who are selling the food, cannot get to the places where the war is going on just because of the fear and just the security issues. So how do we solve the problem of hunger? And these are the areas that are most vulnerable. So these are the people who, at the moment, the UN and the WHO consider them severely vulnerable to hunger. And in some cases, they're already starving. So how do we, improve access to these people and, I guess, make it more affordable for them to get food?
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Amy. Truth be told, as I mentioned earlier, the agri-food sector is far more complicated than rocket science. This is partly why. You're addressing a moving target. You're trying to, first you would think the simple point was, how do you get people fed? How do you ensure people are nourished? But then how do you ensure people are nourished under certain conditions, whether there is conflict, whether there is, issues of access, logistics issues, logistics challenges, all within a framework of climate change and other shocks and stresses, impacting the production systems. And so it's not an easy question to respond to. However, there are organizations over the last few years and decades that have specialized in delivering nutrition to people, the most vulnerable amongst us in areas of conflict. So you have the World Food Program, you have lots of other NGOs like CARE International, etc., that work with partners to ensure that even as they are delivering food to people in areas of conflict, they're also leveraging some of the market systems so that they're not displacing production systems. Now, this is a major challenge because if, for example, I'm not going to use the example of a country because I don't want to get into controversial territory here, but say if a country A, has surplus, 10 million metric ton surplus of grain, say maize, and they want to deploy that as food aid. What they may not take into account is, under normal circumstances, maybe area conflict B receives food from areas, around them. So they have a food production hub. But if you then bypass that entire food production hub and then you bring in your food aid from country A, what you're doing is distorting the markets, because now there will be an excess or surplus of production in the areas around, country B, and that leads to a collapse in the price of the crop. But then, knowing that a lot of farmers grow season to season, if the price collapses in one season, they may not have the incentive, to invest in the next season. And so your aid might lead to an economic crisis, so it's quite complicated in how you ensure that people are nourished and fed, but at the same time, you are not further destabilizing what's an already fragile economic system.
There is what we call the End Technology Fund, which is about $85 million, $75 million, sorry, and about 18.75 million have so far been approved by the Board of Bank of Industry, and it has been disbursed to businesses that relates to technology-related businesses, both in agri and engineering sectors. We have, as a CSR, about 7 hubs right now, tech hubs, that that has common infrastructure that supports businesses across the value chain, especially agriculture. We also have this agri fund value chain funding that also supports these challenges of having farmers difficulty. All this talk we're talking about, the discussion we are having about wastage, perishable items. All these funds are supposed to address those issues, and so far we spent about 8.5 billion. And for youth that we are talking about, we have 2 products, Youth Employment Fund and then Graduate Entrepreneurship Fund. From the 2, we have given out about 2 billion naira so far to small businesses, agri businesses, to youth. And when you talk about youth, definitely you cannot, and you are granting loans to youth, definitely you cannot begin to talk about collateral. So for that aspect, we have, the bank has taken the risk. And so far, we have not seen any reason why we should not do more.
Thank you so much to our speakers. They have been very, very insightful. I've learned so much. They have touched on how we can harness technology from pre-production up until retail, up until like even the kind of nutrition, the kind of nutrients that are in the food that we eat today. Thank you again. If, for those who want more information on what Dr. Mohammed has spoken about, you can find them on the Back of Industry's website. I'm pretty sure you can also find information about Tessie Technologies on their website. Thank you again, everyone. And I guess, like Isaac said, we should go out and solve real problems.
All right, that's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. There's so much as Nigerians we need to do concerning agriculture. Just like Dr. Debisi Araba said, agriculture in Africa is more complicated than rocket science. That was a new one for me that I heard during that session. But I hope you all enjoyed that session as well as gained some knowledge into the agricultural sector, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. That's the much we can take. Thank you all for joining us. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.